Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Q&A for Peace Offering and Taking Root. So I have here the filmmakers from the two films, and I wanted to welcome you and also give you a chance to introduce yourselves. My name is Nguyen, and I am an associate professor at Cal State Fullerton in the Asian American Studies department. So I'm really honored to be able to do this Q&A, and as a former VALA board member, it's always my pleasure whenever VIF comes around and I get to meet all these really cool filmmakers. And after having watched your films, I'm really excited to be a part of this Q&A. So thank you for being here and taking time to do this so that your audience can learn more about you and your films. So if I can just have you introduce yourselves and your role in the films and how you came, maybe just have you introduce your names and your roles first. Yeah.
Hi everyone, Oanh-Nhi Nguyen, director, co-producer of Taking Roots.
Hi everyone, London, co-producer of Taking Root.
Hi, I'm Helen Lismana, and I'm the producer for Peace Offering.
Hi, I'm Emily Vu, and I worked as the co-designer and background artist for Peace Offering.
Awesome. Thank you. It's so nice to meet you. And if you can just say a little bit about your background and how you came into filmmaking, your roles on the film, and how all that came about, that would be great. Oanh-Nhi, do you want to start?
Sure. So I actually started filmmaking when I was very young in high school. There was a broadcast journalism program, so I actually made documentaries back then. I didn't know it then, but I was making social justice documentaries. I actually made a short doc about my parents' stories after the war in Vietnam. So then fast forward, I kind of left a career in film and had a career for 10 years in nonprofit social justice work and also philanthropy. And then the pandemic hit, turned 30, and I realized I wanted to get back into film. So Taking Root was the first thing I ever directed. Had a really close relationship with Viet Lead, Lan, Nancy, and Jung. And Lan had shared that she was doing research about how Southeast Asians resettled in Philadelphia. And that's kind of how I got back into filmmaking. And yeah.
Terrific. Lan, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I wouldn't necessarily call myself a filmmaker. I think have always been interested in making like short videos. I think a lot of them through like community like interviews as a part of working at Viet Lead, which is a nonprofit in Philadelphia and South Jersey. And over like 10 years, we worked with our high school students to capture their stories of their families. And we made like little videos. And ultimately when Oanh-Nhi approached us about this project, we were really excited to connect it to the greater work that we were doing of like capturing our community stories. And at that time, I was doing a archiving fellowship around capturing the stories that are not captured in our libraries, focusing on Southeast Asian refugee resettlement in Philly. So it was really a perfect time to work with Oanh-Nhi. Was really having a hard time finding any stories, in the archives. What was in it was not from our perspective and didn't have our voices. And so really found that it was really important for us to start recording our stories through our own storytelling.
Great.
Yeah,
Emily and Helen?
Yeah, for me, I started filmmaking when I went to Cal State Long Beach for animation specifically. I didn't really know I wanted. we've taken, like, in our program, we had to take a lot of different classes, like storyboarding and character design and background design and visual development and all that. And then on my senior year, I decided I wanted to challenge myself and direct a film. I wouldn't consider myself a leader, and so I was like, you know what, maybe I'll take this opportunity and we'll see how it goes. And I think that like that opportunity like really helped me develop, I think, some sort of like confidence to tell my story out there and my experiences. And through this like amazing journey, I get to collaborate with so many people like Emily, that has like similar experience as in the Asian diaspora. And I was able to connect with a lot of people. And so I think in that sense, I think being like telling my story and being a director is just really, it's really rewarding, just having your film be not only recognized by film festivals but also like having people kind of affirm you that like your experiences are shared with a lot of different people as well. So yeah, I'm confident that like I would love to stay in filmmaking, but yeah, that's how I came into it basically. And
Yeah.
Emily.
Yeah, so I also graduated from Cal State Long Beach with a degree in animation. I have an interest in filmmaking due to just like my love of like animation growing up and everything. Movies like Anastasia, just like all the old Disney movies and everything. And I decided that's what I wanted to pursue in college. So I did that. I ended up minoring in film also. I just really love seeing how people approach different stories, but or similar stories, but using like similar or different like kind of techniques to tell their stories. And I really like that part of filmmaking.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing a little bit about your background. And I'm curious, I know that the films really deal with a lot of personal stories, not only from your own families, but others that you talk about in the film. And I'm curious, what were there any incidents or particular um, uh, events that inspired you to make these particular films? And what was the inspiration for you to make these films?
Well, like for me, like I shared, I actually made a film about my parents' journey after the war when I was 16.
Mhm.
I'm now almost 34. So I think it's interesting to see like how the stories have followed me still. I think it's my trying to understand the intergenerational impact and trauma within myself and through my healing as well, and understand my parents' journey. So I would say the impact of the war, um, that curiosity of what happened to our communities has stayed with me since a very young age.
Mm.
And then when Lan was doing this research, originally I wanted to do one about Viet Lead. And then Lan had mentioned that she was doing this research, and like she said, like nobody was documenting our stories. It just kind of clicked and made a lot of sense. But I think also what Lan alluded to, like what happened to us during the war and after isn't really told in our perspective. And I think that's what inspires me to keep telling these stories, whether it's in documentaries or I also do a narrative. My next short film coming out this year is also inspired by the same theme. So yeah.
I'm curious, what did you use to make your first film at 16 years old? It,
Oh,
how did that come about? Like, what was
you
the
said like,
story?
oh, I was like, which camera? Because it was like a DSLR. I don't remember.
Okay.
So I went to like a high school that had a broadcast journalism program, and it kind of I don't remember. It was like DSLR and just like my dad and my mom, and it took a while for my mom to want to tell her story and end up being voiceover. But it was like a 10-minute short. I actually watched it the other day. I was like, that's pretty good for a 16-year-old, honestly. But I still use archival in it actually, which I did also in Taking Root. But it was, yeah, it was just a 16-year-old trying to make sense of what happened to her parents. And I worked on it for I think like 3 months. I got to show it to my high school classmates.
And it was a way to interview your parents and get to know more about their story. Was that something that was talked about in your family growing up, or it wasn't mentioned much?
Yeah, I think maybe Yell will also resonate. I think it was like the stories will come out when like my mom's cooking sometimes, or if my dad is actually talking to my now husband about his crazy life. Like there are stories I would not hear about, but like it would come out in moments, with moments of connection with me while cooking or with other loved ones. But I wouldn't say it was like commonly shared, and I was always seeking for it. So I think that's kind of why I wanted to make something about their experiences so I can understand it and also document it, and understand like what my parents really went through and pass that on to like now my niece and nephew and like my future kids. So
Yeah. I'm curious, since Emily and Helen, your film talks about these family dynamics, right? And what was your inspiration for also making it animation rather than a live action or something else?
Yeah. Yeah, just hopping off of what Guan Yu was saying, that was perfect. Honestly, yeah, for me, it's also about like the things that are left unsaid, and I feel like it should be talked more about. The reason why I even thought about like the story of peace offering is because I honestly saw a TikTok where it's like, oh, when your Asian parents mad at you and then they bring you like fruit instead of like saying sorry. So it's always the butt of a joke, but it's never really like discussed seriously. And so I kind of want to like kind of delve deep into why that is, right? And like I think in a lot of Western media, we're always used to parents like giving verbal and more I guess like obvious cues of love and care towards their kids in like a lot of American movies. Oh, sorry. And like and it sort of defines as like, oh, this is how you know your parents love you. But I think us in in Asian cultures, it's a lot of these like subtle things, your parents cutting you fruit, or like them bringing you like your favorite snack or something like that. It's not always an obvious I love you, but it doesn't mean that your parents doesn't love you, and it doesn't mean that that love isn't exist, or it's not doesn't that love is not as intense as parents obviously showing you that they love you. And also uh just, just being like having these oh no.
You're
Oh,
okay.
okay, you're good. Okay. Okay. Yeah, just like things like trauma too, those are sort of the things that are not said, and I feel like it's things that we sweep under the rug because like maybe you don't it's too painful to say, or you don't really want to pass that down to your kids or something like that. But I think it's very very well, there's a way to say it, but I think that should be communicated, and I think also that it's healthy to sort of discuss that and overcome that. And it's very hard to overcome generational trauma, obviously, and I think my film is sort of like a testament how it's not just like black and white. um, but yeah, I think if I had to say what inspired me, it's the things that are left unsaid that I feel like should be talked more about.
Okay, great. Lang, you mentioned your involvement in Viet Lead and how that shaped your ability to help others and also wanting to tell more stories, right, that are not in the archives. And I was wondering, how did you and Viet Lead and Oanh-Nhi come together to make this a project? Because it's not necessarily every day, right, that filmmakers make films about particular organizations and the social justice work that they do.
Yeah, it was. I feel like it was really a beautiful, natural way it happened. We were always in relationship with Oanh-Nhi. Oanh-Nhi was, also a part of Viet Lead, like family. And so when Oanh-Nhi approached us with it, it just felt like perfect timing. And I think how this film was made, I think it was in a really beautiful way, that it was also very community based, because we had our students, we like trained our high school students on kind of the topics that we were gonna go over in the documentary, and then they actually conducted the interviews. And the interviewees that we asked were from our relationships that Viet Lead has been building for many years. At one point when I was doing the research, and I knew I wanted to focus on certain high schools that Southeast Asians were resettled in at first. And I like sent out an email to our past alumni students. And I was like, did any of your parents go to these schools? Because I'm curious if they experience these topics. And then it turned out a bunch of students, like parents, went to these schools, and I was like, can you ask them if like how their experience was and if they would be willing to be interviewed? And they realized that their parents never told them about these stories, and they only heard it after we interviewed them. So to me, it was such a beautiful, so many yeah, I think it's just like a beautiful opportunity of like building off of the many years of relationships that we were building, but having a platform to really amplify those stories and really putting it together in a really beautiful way that I think allowed people to like also like resource themselves as they were like watching themselves and like listening to others' stories.
Yeah, Oanh-Nhi, what was your role in Viet Lead? How were you involved in that organization?
Oh, I was like a massive groupie. Like I was like biggest fan. Like I met Nancy. She's a co-director when I was 23, actually through a previous job, and I moved to Philly, and I knew they were there. So, I was never immersed in Viet community that much. Like I pretty was like isolated from Vietnamese community growing up when I moved to the United States. So that was like kind of like I just feel like it was so immersed and happy and joyful to be around them because they were doing really amazing work for the community, not just Viet communities, but other communities, Black and Brown communities. And I just like fell in love with their organizing and just how powerful they were, the work they were doing. So I was essentially a volunteer. I just kind of helped like whenever they needed anything. But it's like been a very long time now, like 10 years, I think.
That's great. Yeah, I really enjoyed hearing the stories, not only from Vietnamese American perspectives, but how you involved Cambodian, Laotian, right, Chinese, and a lot of these communities that our voices are often ignored. And I'm curious in terms of the Philadelphia local communities, what percentage of the population is Asian, and out of that, like what percentage are these different ethnic communities there?
It's a great question. Let me look it up really quick. I do not know off the top of my head.
And I'm curious for Helen and Emily. You said that you're from Cal State Long Beach, and Cal State Long Beach has the largest Cambodian population, right, in the U.S. outside of Cambodia, and so I'm curious. Did you have any ideas about how Southeast Asian communities experience these universal themes, right, of intergenerational trauma. And was that something that you thought about when you made your film?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Fun fact, I'm actually an international student from Indonesia. So I grew up with, like a very, very like because my parents are Chinese and I'm also Chinese, so I grew up with like in a Chinese household tech basically. And so yeah, like generational like intergenerational trauma is like definitely a big plot in my film, and it's like the main topic of it. And I guess it's just sort of like recognizing it, and also things that I wish like were communicated better. And also like I I'm not really, like I feel like my experiences, it is probably like different than like other people's. But yeah, I just wanted to, like, I guess, speak on what I guess like how I grew up, and sort of the culture that I grew up with. I'm pretty sure it's like different across Southeast Asia, and other Southeast Asians experiences. But I think I also just, it's an honor for me to be able to share this in this platform and share with like a lot of other Southeast Asians, like filmmakers and other creatives out there.
Yeah, what I
And
really appreciated about both of your films, it talks about this idea of the historical influences and how the Vietnam War not only affected Vietnamese, right, but also all of these surrounding countries. And a lot of refugees, including my family, we landed in Indonesia when we escaped from
Oh.
Vietnam, for example, right? So it's really interesting to see the intertwining of all these histories. And I really appreciated, Oanh-Nhi, how you preface the film with the war in Vietnam, and you had a, a few of your interviewees talk about we are here in the U.S., right, because the U.S. was there in Vietnam. And I wonder how your filmmaking has helped you to understand uh, your relationship with war and what happened with your families, and yeah, these universal themes that you talk about in terms of mental health issues, right, social justice, the interracial conflicts and collaborations that occurred in your communities. How did these making these films to understand those issues better, if any?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely I want to give a lot of credit and shout out to Viet Lead for their work in Philadelphia, specifically with this analysis about like how it's not just the war in Vietnam or Vietnam War, it's like the war in Southeast Asia. So maybe, Lana, maybe you can share more about that. But for me, what insights have I gained on these issues? I mean, I think definitely because Via Lead had connections and relationships with community leaders who were Laotian and Cambodians. Even for me, like witnessing their stories be so interconnected to my community, my family was kind of also an eye opener for me. Like I had heard these stories, but to like witness them and see how common they were, and the way that folks were resettled, the impact, of systemic racism that had on them. Um, so like definitely it's still like opened up a lot for me. That even though, yeah, I knew intellectually, but to witness it in person telling you, I actually had a similar interview last weekend, actually, for another project on the Southeast Asian market in Philadelphia. And I interviewed Laotian, Cambodian vendors. And again, like, just like witnessing the impact of war, even though next year is the 50th anniversary on our communities, it still is so heart-wrenching for me and heartbreaking. And also like taking root was we really wanted to amplify the struggle, the truth of what it was like about the US being there, and also highlighting like our power, our triumph, our joy. So that for me was, as a filmmaker, always trying to figure out that balance, because I want to be as truthful as possible in making films. And it can be tricky sometimes with these kinds of issues, but I think it's important to maintain a balance of both. But I'll share it to Lan to share more about her thoughts too.
Yeah, I think one of the hopes of the film was what do we choose to focus on when we know that there's so much trauma in our communities, and that the war, there are so many mixed feelings about the war, and so many of our stories are focused on the war. And so I think for this, we're like, well, actually, let's not just focus on the war, because that can stir up a lot of trauma, and we don't want to question people's trauma and like experiences, because it is what it is. Let's talk about what happened when we got here, and let's talk about the struggle. And like, that's not talked about enough. Can across generations, can we actually be on the same page about what happened when we got here? And so we focused it on that as kind of an entry point to be able to have intergenerational conversations, so that like my parents' generation and like my generation, we can actually agree of like, okay, yeah, it was hard when we got here. And I think another thing for us that was important too was, space to just allow the stories to happen, and also like providing some structure, like some political analysis too, of like, these conditions that we were brought into, like poverty, racism, so many of those were really like was like the war continued once we got here, and was also like re-traumatizing for folks. And sometimes folks can like blame each other, like internalize it, or like blame others, or like self isolate, and it can become very like personal. And I think with providing structural analysis can actually allow people to be like, oh, it wasn't my fault. It wasn't this person's fault. It was actually, we were set up structurally to fail. We were set up structurally to struggle. And I feel like that provides healing of like, oh, okay, this isn't me. And actually like redevote my energy towards change and towards organizing for change for other people, which can allow like healing for me and for others as well.
Thank you. Helen and Emily, did you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, of course. That's what you two both just said. That's really that's it's very insightful, and I have never thought about it like that before. And as an international student, I feel like I'm always learning, and I think this is one of those moments where I'm just like, oh my gosh, wow, I've never like thought about it before. Yeah, but for peace offering, yeah, just dealing more with like abuse and intergenerational trauma, how like abuse can pass off from one one member to the other and from one generation to the other and within a household, and how that can also affect the person surrounding you, not just within someone in that family. And I think for my film, I wanted to express that even if it does get better, and even if someone does have the chance to start all over again and try not to repeat what the previous generations has done, it's still really hard. The reality is that you can never be perfect, and it takes like generations, like few to like a lot of generations before you can start to undo like the whole cycle of that. And it's all about like of course, like trying, because like you can never be perfect, but just taking that first step, those little steps of trying to undo everything is already worth, already makes a dent in like trying to fix it, essentially. So I think with my film, I don't want to just to portray a, sort of like happy solution, that like a happy ending. I wanted to make it sort of open ended, because it's not that easy. It's not that simple. It's oftentimes very complicated. And so yeah, and yeah, I also do want to sympathize too with like people who are experiencing this, and just, if it's a happy ending to the film, that it means it's like, oh yeah, this, it's a, it's that easy. Why should you why are, it's easy to do. Like, why are you not, why are you not there? But it takes a lot of time and a lot of just self-reflection, and um steps to sort of like undo that whole thing. But yeah, Emily, do you have anything to add?
For me, to answer the question of like insights that I gained from working on this film, earlier you mentioned the question of like living in California and being surrounded by a lot of Southeast Asian population. Being from Garden Grove and like Little Saigon, I was like constantly surrounded by a lot of Vietnamese people. So hearing Helen's story of like the generational trauma and everything, I really started to work. And when I shared the story premise with my friends, they're like, "Oh, I completely like understand that." So it was really nice to find like film to work on that was like very unifying to like myself and my community.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I think both films made it very clear that there's a lot of issues outside of individual personal narratives, right, that influence our histories and how we interact with others. And I think, particularly Taking Root, I really appreciated giving the structural racism and the systemic institutional violence that occurred and how that affected these refugee immigrant communities, right? And I particularly really appreciated Debbie Way's interview and how she talked about, right, doing the grassroots organizing, working on welfare reform, for example, the black and white dynamics, and how the Southeast Asians entered into that picture. And I was wondering, in making the films, did you see any, I guess, parallels to what we're currently experiencing today? And, like you said, the Vietnam War happened almost 50 years ago. What has changed and what hasn't changed? And in your social justice work that you do, and the filmmaking that you do, what insights have you gained in terms of how people deal with these issues, and how are they able to tell their stories, and how that affects their healing process, right? Because I really appreciated hearing these stories directly from these people that went through it, right? The gang members who uh, are now community organizers, right? And the community organizers who now really understand what poverty looks like, and what it means to really get to the ground and do that work. Yeah, what are your? It's a big question.
Yeah, it's a big question. I'll start. I'll try and start. But yeah, it was interesting because I think we started this during the middle of the pandemic, which was during the kind of like the more visibilization of the anti-Asian hate violence. Um, a lot of the narratives around that sometimes became very like individualized, and sometimes the narratives were anti-Black as well. And I think one of the motivators of my research and the film was also really interrogating that of like, what is the historical root of anti-Asian hate, which is like rooted in like, like imperialism, in also like how Southeast Asian resettlement, um, was also based off of like anti-Black policies, how Southeast Asian refugees benefited from anti-Black policies. And then ultimately, because we are in the same communities, we're also impacted by anti-Black policies through, like poverty and also mass incarceration. So that was really important for us to really talk to that in the political climate that was at the height of anti-Asian hate violence, and also like the Black uprising, and like bring conversations together. And I think it was really important for us to draw the parallel to show just the importance of how interconnected our communities are, and how important, as we are telling Southeast Asian history, to also show how, you know, our continued resistance is so tied to solidarity with like Black communities.
Yeah.
You want to add to that?
No, that was beautiful. Beautifully said. I wouldn't add anything.
So I was just teaching class today, and we read Audre Lorde's The Transformation of Silence, and there's a quote in there that talks about how she says, "Without community, there is no liberation," right? And I think your films make it very clear that these refugees and immigrants, what they went through, and some are still going through, right? There's a lack of institutional support. And oftentimes that community is absent, right? And it's not because there's not people that are caring enough to help and support these immigrants and refugees, but how do you unite them, right? And build that solidarity when there's so many systemic factors that come into play to divide these communities, right? So I don't know if you have any insights after having done these films and all the work that you've done with organizations. Do you have any ideas on how we can go about building that solidarity?
There's this quote. I hope I don't butcher it, but it's no history, no self, no history, no. So it's like the NO, no history, no self. Like, so if you don't know your history, you're not going to know yourself.
Yeah.
But if you know your history, then you know yourself. And to me, we can only build true solidarity with other communities by first like knowing our own selves and our own histories. So I think that's also just like the beauty of these documentaries, is that it is like us learning more about ourselves. And through our own healing, we can also like truly authentically like show up in solidarity with other communities.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think it's also like claiming our space, like sharing our stories, and they're worth telling, and that they matter. We're actually doing a national tour right now with the documentary, with Southeast Asian Freedom Network. So if we're talking about building solidarity, our hope is next year and in June 2025, to bring Southeast Asian folks, communities, to DC, to ask for the U.S. to take accountability for unexploited ordnance, Agent Orange in Southeast Asia, and to end deportation of Southeast Asian immigrants. So we're hoping to build solidarity with the doc, and Viet Lee's Southeast Asian Freedom Network has been doing this work for years. And yeah, I mean, already building a movement, right, Lan, with Southeast Asian Freedom Network, but all the work that has already been set for many years, but now using the doc for organizing.
Yeah, and noting it'll be the 50th year anniversary of the end of the wars in Southeast Asia in 2025. So this campaign, just noting it for folks, it's called the Southeast Asian Relief and Responsibility Platform.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And on that note too, what were some challenges that you encountered in making these films?
Yeah. I guess like the challenges for me and for peace offering would be sort of to like what kind of message do I want to say about this, right? Because it's a very sensitive message. It revolves around abuse, and so I feel like I have this big responsibility to kind of handle it very like delicately and just very like I have to be very sensitive to the victims and people who has gone through um abuse and generational trauma and are still going through all those. And so I think it just revolves around what do I want to say with this message, and it's sort of I had to sort of confront my like own beliefs and also what do I think about my experiences and what maybe my parents went through and what my grandparents went through. And so it takes a little, like talking to my friends, my Asian friends who also grew up under these like cultures, like because they also really about what they think about like the culture they grew up with, and like I said, like the culture where we don't really communicate love verbally. We kind of assure each other in this very very subtle ways. And so yeah, it just it takes a lot of like discussing with my other Asian friends and Asian American friends for sure. And Emily, do you have something to say?
In terms of challenges, I would probably talk more on the side of like the technical production side, like just like the fact that it's an animated film that Helen made, and the fact that it's a senior thesis project. So she had to kind of work on it in less than a year to complete it. There's like definitely time constraints and a lot of deadlines to focus and like worry about. And when it comes to like creating an animated film, like there's like so many things that you need to make from scratch, from like just like background elements to like storyboards to like character designs to like doing like animation. Just definitely like a challenge, but she did it.
Yeah, that's really important. I kind of left that out. Yeah, but definitely the time constraints too with animation. Just like sort of figuring out what kind of mood, what kind of tone that we want to set. Because with animation, I think like the fact that we can control so many things is great, but it also presents us with like a whole other new set of challenges for sure. But yeah, I think I'm really lucky to have Emily as my co designer. Couldn't have done it without her.
She's an amazing director.
That's great. Ani, I noticed you also had animation in your film. How did that decision come about, and how did that affect the
How did
story?
it come about? Yeah. I wanted to definitely use archival. I didn't want to use any archival that centered like, the soldiers, American soldiers, or seeing, like violent things happening to us. But then I was also thought that illustration would be a nice way to visualize people's journeys, what we went through. So it's not just talking heads. And so it was actually really cool. I brought on two Viet illustrators who's never done film before. And then we partnered with Maestro Filmworks, an amazing post-production company, very close partners to Taking Root, and they helped animate some of the illustrations. And then, yeah, that's how it came to be.
That's great. Any challenges that you want to share in the filmmaking?
Yeah, money, like money. I think funding for docs about Southeast Asian communities is hard to come by. Obviously, there's a couple film grants, but they're very competitive. But also, I was a first-time director, so a lot of people didn't want to take a risk on me as like an emerging director, having literally nothing other than my high school films, which I didn't show anybody. But that was extremely challenging to get funding. Luckily, I was partnered with Viet Lead, so we were able to get nonprofit grants other than film funding. But I got zero film grant funding because people didn't know this project, how special this project was, and what potential it had. So that was a big challenge.
So where did you end up finding funding?
Yeah, so like from partners, like actual foundations that supported Viet Lead's work. Also, because I worked in philanthropy and I consulted for some funds, so I was able to work with those relationships. But shout out to Maheen Kaleem from Grandmakers for Girls of Color. Without her, like this film, like I needed finishing funds, and we were being held off by another funder. So just like badass women of color in philanthropy having our backs was really amazing. Also, shout out to William Penn Foundation, APS Civic Engagement Fund, which was our first grant. That was really amazing as well. And people who we crowdfunded as well. So family and friends giving to us was incredibly beautiful to see people coming out to support us.
That's terrific. Yeah, I really appreciated just seeing the hard work, right? From having been trained in nonprofit work too, and having a public health background, like I really could relate to all of that. So kudos to you for getting this film made. And we're running up on time, so I wanted to finish up with any fun stories or any final words that you'd like to share about your films experiences in making the films.
Maybe I think something that has been fun is as people watch the film, and also when we were like showing our interviewees like different drafts, that we would show like the archive like photos, and people would be like, oh, I know that person. Or like somebody will do screenings and people are like, that's me, like that's my mom, and people like take the photo and then like bring it back home. And it's just been really cool of seeing how it's through all the screenings, it's also just been like building community and folks like really enjoying like just nostalgia of like looking back and like remembering back in the day and like seeing themselves like in the film. That has been really fun.
Yeah, it's powerful, right? To see your name, your story featured on the big screen. And I think it's really amazing how people get very connected and emotional about feeling validated, basically, right? And acknowledged. Yeah.
Yeah.
Helen?
Yeah, of course. Like I think one of the most fun aspects about this film is just being able to work with like my amazing like talented friends and crews. Definitely one of Emily's one of them. Emily's a director too, by the way. We first sort of worked together on her film that she directed, and I hired her to be on my film. I think sort of like the an aspect of animation um, that I really like, at least in my program in Cal State Long Beach, is that our interconnectivity and how much we kind of need each other. Like Emily can hire me as her animator, and then I can hire Emily. And then I can hire my other friends. Like, the fact that there's so many different pipelines of animation, and there's so many skills, and then there's so many talented people. It's just always fun to like sort of bring them together, and we all work in this one project, and we have this, so much fun in like just like collaborating, working together, bringing in our individual like very unique perspectives on this one project. But of course there's, it's the deadlines and everything makes everything very stressful and stuff. But yeah, I would say the entire process is really fun because I get to work with so many amazing people. Emily, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would say some of the most fun parts is like seeing people's reactions to the seeing people come to help. I really related with that. And I remember one funny thing. Someone came up to Helen and said that he related to the father character. He was like, the guy. in the film. So we thought that was pretty funny and interesting. But it's really interesting to
Mhm.
hear everyone's perspective, like their take on the film and the project.
I'll just add quickly, for Taking Root, it was the first for many people to be on a set, including me. So it was really interesting and fun that it was a lot of people's first, but I think we created a really amazing environment. And yeah, it was just everybody was learning, and it was new for everybody. So kind of bonded over that as well.
Thank you so much. Lang, did you have anything else to add? Or okay, great. Well, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your experiences in making these two amazing films. I really hope that I can show these films to my students in the long run and hopefully get them into the libraries for archiving purposes and so that you have a wider audience. But thank you for being a part of Viet Film Fest this year. And will you be in person at the festival? Okay, wonderful. Terrific. So I hope to meet you
Yeah.
in person then. All right. Well, thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much
much.
again.
Thank
See
you
y'all
so
then.
much.
Take care.